Hello. Good evening in Ghana. Good evening, many parts of Africa. Good morning in the US. We thank you all for coming to celebrate the life and legacy of one of the greatest African intellectuals of all time. We are very happy that you are able to join us. Let me apologize for starting with another bad news, that we also lost a friend of Ama, also one of our greatest intellectual leaders, Mr. Mugo. So the deaths are too many, and they come so rapidly. In January, I lost a friend of mine to stroke, and I participated in his recovery and burial. Like a month later, I also had my stroke. And as I was recovering from the hospital, I began to wonder whether my friend wanted me to join him. And I was torn. Among the Yoruba, when you lose a cherished person, the prayer is, may the days and the years be separated so that we do not join ourselves rather quickly. It's a tragedy in terms of losing two people at the same time, but these are lives that were very well spent, contributions that will last us for a long time. And the way we've structured this program is to celebrate. I will call on Dr. Wale Okediran, very well known, currently the president of the Pan-African Writers Association, to give you the layout of the program for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, and welcome to our distinguished panelists and members of the audience. We thank you very much for being part of this program. We know that today being a Sunday, many people usually reserve the day for to rest and also maybe to do some religious activities. So we know we are taking out of your precious time, but working with Professor Falola, we had to look at the best time to hold this together. We discovered that Saturdays are really also very busy with all kinds of social engagements. So that's why we agree for today. Now we have lined up a good program that will be very interactive. We're going to start with some welcome remarks by the daughter of the late Professor Aidoo. And then we'll do a poetry recitation, like a spiritual inspiration to set us up on this journey. And then we have a panel of distinguished panelists drawn from Ghana, Egypt, Kenya, and Nigeria, as well as Uganda. We just wanted to make sure we cut across the African continent in a Pan-African manner, because I work for the Pan-African Writers Association, and I'm the Secretary General. Professor Falola has pushed me a little bit up the ladder as the president. So, our work is mainly to engage with our writers from Africa, Africa in diaspora, and we've been doing this work for the last 30 years. And I'm happy to say that we succeeded, I can say, to a large extent in using literature to promote African unity. I recall that during the last lecture, where we had Honorable Sanuna Nkrumah on the seat. The issue came up to say that maybe we should revisit what we mean by Pan-Africanism, because it seems as if it's not working. And his belief is that regional discourse, regional associations are working more in Africa than the Pan-African thing. But I'm happy to say that the Pan-African Writers Association, with the limited support at our disposal, we've been able to bring together various voices from the African continent. And we have to thank Professor Falola, who we see as a global man. He is not a Pan-African, he's gone beyond Pan-Africanism. He is now on the global terrain. Some of us call him behind his back, Ashiwaju of the globe. That is literally leader of the globe. Anyway, so today we're going to have the panel discussion, after which we allow the audience to also interact, because we are aware that so many people in the audience also have a lot to say about the subject of today's discourse. And then we'll come back to the panelists for them to have maybe 2 minutes each to round up before we depart. So we're looking forward to a very robust and engaging event. And we thank you once again for coming. And then I hand over back to Prof. Falola, who will be the moderator of the whole thing. Thank you.
For those of you who have been part of this interview series before, you know how it works. We use Zoom to restream to live television stations and radio stations. And they are broadcasting this live in some other countries. Our poet is very well known. Okediran Oswald, who has won various awards as a poet, spoken word artist, playwright, is a storyteller, and he has been featured on various platforms with such legends as Baruka, Okai, Aidoo, Rocky Dawuni, among others. He represented his country, Ghana, at the 2016 Story Moja Festival in Nairobi, Kenya, and at the Babishai Poetry Festival in Kampala, Uganda. His works, a line of very creative works: First Harvests, a collection of poems; A Wreath to Awuno, another collection; COVID-19 Verses and Tragedy; In the Bag of a Woman. And in 2016, he was voted as the best Pan-African poet, spoken word artist in Ghana. And he has received so many other awards. We thank him for his great work as the organizing secretary of the Ghana Association of Writers. We cannot thank you enough, and we look forward to your performance today. Oswald, please. Oswald.
Waka bemu bemwa wam kaziaba waka bemwa wame waka bemu ao ya Fio, Bonya, Wonya, in the end, the soul reaper, our tender friend, shall come what it must. It waits
Oswald, can we bring you back later on while you fix your technical problems? Oswald, we'll bring Oswald back. Let's bring him back after the technical program has been solved. He's having some serious technical challenges. We'll bring you back. Let's bring Oswald back, please. He's having technical challenges. Is Kina, are you here? Kina, please, we'll bring Oswald back. Kina, is Kina here? Kina. Is Kina here, please?
No, I don't think so, Prof.
Okay. So let's sorry about that. We'll bring the poet back. We tested his equipment on Wednesday and it worked well, but today it doesn't seem to have the luck. Dr. Okediran, can you please bring our colleague from Kenya?
Yeah, yes, he promised to join. Professor.
While waiting for him, we go to Our Excellency, very well known, Professor Abena Busia, a Ghanaian diplomat, internationally known poet, and is currently serving as Ghana's ambassador and a professor emerita, having served 40 years in the Department of English and Women's and Gender Studies, Rutgers University. Famous and well-known, she received fellowships and awards from the Rockefeller, from Fulbright, from Ford, and she has published widely. She does not require an introduction. Professor Busia, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I am very honored and touched to be here. This is an important moment for so many of us. What you had asked us to do was to give personal tributes, to capture the spirit of what Auntie Ama Ata Aidoo meant to us through telling of our encounters with her. There are many, many stories so many of us could tell, even me, about how she came to Rutgers, the encounters we had with her at various conferences. But for me, the one that stands out, and which for me is the most important one to encapsulate on one of the things that was so central to us as African women writers and scholars, and that is the spirit of generosity with which she embraced us. Those of you who know my collection, Testimonies of Exile, will know that Auntie Ama wrote a review which appears on the back cover. And I want to read what she says because I want to talk about how that came about. She wrote in Testimonies of Exile, Abena Busia brilliantly exposes exile as an almost living creature, cruel and omnivorous. In these poems, we encounter this particular beast in its dimensions, especially exile from land, language, those we love, and ourselves. The testimonies span continents and stretch across time, from our very beginnings to our endings. Indeed, in their profundity, clarity, and force of language, and distilled as they are from a wealth of living, exile itself, and dying, so many of these poems should be, quote, the work of a mature poet at the peak of his life's work. It is a mark of both the current tragedy and uniqueness of Africa and her peoples, both at home and abroad, that the collection is from a young woman in her prime. Read them and wonder too. When I read that tribute, it stunned me. And this is just an edited version of the letter she wrote. For me, personally, as an endorsement of my first collection, it was so very profound. But I reference it here, not so much for what the tribute itself says, wonderful as it is, but the story behind it being written at all, which is the story of my first individual, one-on-one, face-to-face conversation that I'd ever had with Auntie Ama. I'd seen her before, but in crowds, you know, conversations, dinners. But this was the first time I was with her alone in her hotel room. Because back in 1989, when we were preparing Testimonies of Exile for press, my publisher, the man, wonderful Eritrean we all know, Kasahun Chekoli of Africa World Press, was wondering who could write the endorsements for the back of the book. And we wanted an American, as I was living in the United States, an African-American and an African. And for the African, we agreed that there was only one person we wanted to hear from. At the time, the only other Ghanaian woman poet already published by an international press, and that was Ama Ata Aidoo. So we sent her the manuscript and waited and waited and waited. That year, 1989, was the 8th Triennial Association of Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies, a Silver Jubilee Conference, which was held at the University of Kent in Canterbury, England. And Auntie Ama was one of the featured invited speakers. So off we went to track her down. Kasahun already had an appointment to meet with her that first day, so he took me in tow. And as soon as she saw me, she greeted me, smiled, and acknowledged that she knew why I was there. Then she did a surprising thing. She asked me to come and see her for that private conversation. When I arrived in her room, what she did astonished me even more. She asked me if I knew who she was. A question to which, of course, I smiled and asked if she knew any Ghanaian literary scholars and writers who did not know who she was. But it wasn't her literary, but her ideological identity that she was alluding to. She wanted to be clear that I understood the history of her political affiliations, explaining to me that she'd called me for a talk to make sure I knew, and this was how she put it, that she was a die-hard Nkrumahist and that this was never going to change. I responded by telling her that I taught her work, including Our Sister Killjoy, and confessed to her that there was a page or two which I prayed no student would ever ask me about, because I found them painful to read even after all these decades. Those of you who know that book will know I'm referring to the scene in which she satirizes a conversation my father had with Edward Heath when they were both prime ministers, my father of Ghana, Edward Heath of the United Kingdom. It is a very biting satire in true Ama Ata Aidoo style. When I mentioned that, she laughed and said she was pleased I understood. But then she asked me if I knew that, why I had sent my manuscript to her anyway. To me, the answer was simple. I was a young Ghanaian woman poet about to publish my first collection. I needed an honest assessment from someone from within the community to which I felt I belonged. So I finished by asking her the question, if I cannot ask you, who else can I ask? She thanked me for the clarity and forthrightness of my answer. I refrained from saying I had had good mentors on that issue, and said that on the basis of that informed trust, she would indeed send her comments to my publisher. I tell this story because I was very touched by the interview. She did not have to do that. She could have ignored us, as we all know that happens to a lot of manuscripts, or she could have returned the manuscript saying she was too busy, which she really was at the time, but she did neither of those things. She chose to speak with me, to make clear the ground on which we both stood. And by doing that, she established a basis of trust between us, which lasted to the very end. And I have always treasured that. That trust lasted to the point where, for example, as many of you know, Yaba Bedu's film about her, you never see me on screen, but I am the person that Auntie Ama is talking to. I am the interviewer in that film. And as I say, I've always treasured that meeting, that trust, that openness that she chose to show, as I value the way, in fact, that very first meeting ended. As I turned to leave, she said to me wryly in her inimicable way, "You do know, don't you, that both you and I will probably be in trouble with our friends and colleagues if I do this and my name appears on the back of your book." By that time, I was standing in the doorway of her hotel room, and I said, "Yes, probably." And we both burst out laughing. The letter containing the review arrived within weeks of the end of that conference. And when the letter arrived, I was so very touched by what it said. The style, even her wonderful tongue-in-cheek quoting of the work of a mature poet at the peak of his life. You know, her recognition that the assumption that the poet is always male in that tongue-in-cheek way that she has. So I shared it with you, not to advertise a book that was published more than 30 years ago now, but because the words and the context in which they were written, which I've now shared with you, remain for me such a clear demonstration of her forthrightness and honesty, her willingness to be bold in her support of other up-and-coming writers, especially women, and her commitment to mentoring us wherever she found us. There is good reason why a whole generation or two of writers and scholars, especially women across the continent and the world, have been in grief these last few weeks, sending messages of tribute and solidarity to the Pan-African Writers Association, the host of women's institutions and literary associations to which she belonged, and her family, in particular her daughter Kina, of whom she was so very proud. And I am proud to have been one of her literary daughters. Thank you for asking me to share my story.
That's very wonderful. Thank you so much. The story of difference, reconciliation, and affirmation. We cannot thank you enough. Let's move to Egypt, where I'll be inviting the well-known figure, Ashraf Aboul-Yazid, who is a writer. He worked in cultural journalism for more than 35 years. He has written 42 books, authored and translated an anthology of his poetry books, A Street in Cairo. And then he did The Memory of Butterflies, The Memory of Silence, The Whisper of the Sea. And his works have been translated into English, Sindhi, German, Russian, Persian, Turkish, and Spanish. He's at the moment the president of the Asian Journalists Association and the editor-in-chief of the Silk Road Literature Series. Please let us welcome this award-winning distinguished author, Ashraf Aboul-Yazid. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm really honored to join you in this occasion to celebrate a legendary voice from Africa, Ama Ata Aidoo, a sparrow from Africa. Let me briefly share with you my screen. As you see in this photo, we have three men writers. On the right, Tawfiq al-Hakim from Egypt, Tayyib Saleh from Sudan, and Abdul Karim Ghallab from Morocco. Actually, I brought three examples of their writings that all of them express the relationship between East and West, or South and North. Perhaps I could start in the year 1938, 85 years ago, when Egyptian writer Tawfiq al-Hakim published his novel, A Sparrow from the East. Tawfiq al-Hakim embodied part of autobiography in addition to his expected handling of the clash between East and West in more than one aspect. In that novel, the narrator tells the story of a young man from the East named Mohsen, who travels to France to study, meets a ticket seller in the theater and falls in love with her without knowing even her name. Nothing he knows about her. He decides to express his love to her, so he presents her a parrot called Mohsen to accompany her everywhere she goes, but the girl doesn't feel the same way. Briefly, Mohsen realizes that she is not the right person for him. Their love is ended, the relationship is over, and he knew another one from Russia, atheist Russian friend, who used to offer harsh criticism to the West and its civilization, so that Mohsen finds himself in front of two contradictory worlds material and spiritual, or West and East. For Tawfiq al-Hakim, the West was France, actually, or Paris in particular, which is self-evident because the relationship with the other begins with the former colonizer. We see the same theme after 3 decades in the novel by Sudanese writer Tayyib Saleh. And Tayyib Saleh had a novel, Seasons of Migration to the North, which was published in 1966 in Beirut. And he chose another colonizer, which is Britain. The hero in Season of Migration to the North is a student named Mustafa, gets a job or the lecturer in a British university and adopts the values of British society. There he meets his wife, Jane Morris, a British woman who refuses to accept her husband's dictates. Years later, Mustafa returns to his country where he suddenly meets a narrator of the story who also lived in Britain. This was an introduction to emphasize the richness of the topic to on writers who dealt in more than one format with the West, whether it is South versus the North or West against the East. Even in contemporary novels such as An Oriental Lady in Paris in 2006, Moroccan author Abdul Karim Ghalab, after 8 decades, had the same idea, which also seen here by the first ever book by Ama Ata Aidoo, which is The Dilemma of a Ghost. Why I brought those examples? Actually, I brought those examples to differentiate what the main writers did and what Ama did. While the mentioned above authors were all men who traveled to the West and narrated their experiences, we have a different situation, that is the West is coming to the East. The North is living in the South in Ama Ata Aidoo's play, The Dilemma of the Ghost, published in 1965, which is considered one of Ghana's first and most influential post-colonial literary works that followed Ghana's independence from the British colonization in 1957. The play came out to light in a critical period in which post-colonial Ghanaian identity was being formed on all levels, psychological, social, political. Some critics consider that its exceptional importance in the history of Ghana in particular and Africa at large. Though Ghana, as historical fact, was not the first African nation to get its independence, both Egypt of Tawfiq al-Hakim and the Sudan of Tayyib Saleh preceded in 1956 its liberation from Ghana's liberation from the British imperialism was a landmark in the history of the whole continent. Historically and in geography, Ghana occupied a significant position in the history of colonialism and liberation movements in Africa. Its location on the west coast of the continent enabled it once to act a prominent role in the slave trade between Africa and the New World for over 3 centuries through its famous historical ports as Cape Coast and Elmina. That are referred in Aidoo's drama Question as Dr. Muhammad Gaber Abdul Fadil mentioned in his study about Aidoo's play. As such, the emergence of the new nation state of Ghana was the center of attention, all concerned with historical conflict between colonialism and anti-colonialism, the West and the East, and traditions and modernity. In other words, Ghana has become a major field of post-colonial studies. I see Ghana's Ghanaian writer Ama Ata Aidoo, an outspoken woman who resists and subverts traditional literary boundaries. She had varied prolific literary career, publishing poems, plays, short stories, essays, and novels. This also, let us say, brought critics to her works, and even after teaching for several years at various institutions in Africa and the USA, earned the respect and the recognition of the African American writers, Alice Walker, who affirms from the front cover of Aidoo's Ghanaian edition of her novel, The Changes, that Aidoo has reaffirmed my belief in the power of the written word to reach, teach, empower, and encourage. In an interview with Ama Ata Aidoo entitled I Learned My First Feminist Lesson in Africa by Maria Freitas, we read how Aidoo challenges, dismantles, subverts the traditional dumbness of the Black women trope. She was born into the Akan community, a Ghanaian group that overly favors women, according to Aidoo in the point, where mother of 4 still considers herself barren because she cannot bear any daughter, and where women are supposed to bear children. Power, but not strength. Aidoo's progressive portrayal of African women is just a reflection of what she saw. I have got this amazing view of what is going on that society, and I defy. I don't know that being a woman is so important in an Akan society. Accordingly, Aidoo advances the complex lives of women who act contradictory ways, haunted by African traditions, but caught up in the disintegration of post-colonial Africa. She is just one of many female voices that urgently need to be heard after being silenced for so long. The irony that here lies in the fact that Aidoo also gave voice to Muslim women like Husina, also in the Changes, who though university educated abroad, intelligent, conform to submissive social and religious rules assigned by them in the culture. Aidoo's themes of marriage, motherhood, emotional and economic dependence, women's education, their political and economic marginalization, resistance of corporations, all these are her themes in her works. With an unconscious Western feminist agenda, no Western feminist agenda in her mind, Aidoo insists that she didn't learn the notions of feminism outside of Africa, and that vocal woman simply came from her Akan Aidoo side. So when she got the chance to be in Europe and US for a real encounter, she continued to express her ideas born in her work. The dilemma of a ghost before leaving home, Mother Africa. I would also say that Ama Ata Aidoo has Africanized some of Shakespearean scenes perfectly. The bird of the wayside in her starting prelude in the play is folkloric African narrator who knows the past, present, and the future. In the same way, Shakespeare used the 3 witches in Macbeth's starting scene to tell prophecy that Macbeth will one day be the king. The difference is Ama's bird of the wayside is not telling us what is going to happen. Rather, it invited us to see events together. As a conclusion, while men wrote about characters from masculine point of view, Ama Ata Aidoo was keen to exhibit the feminine opinion. It is important to mention that Ama Ata Aidoo succeeded to embody the woman not only in Africa, Ghana, but in her own Akan society, with their traditions and entity. For her, she didn't have to travel first to examine her ideas, as many writers did. She wrote her play while she was in college. I finally believe that there are common questions I may ask. Observing a sparrow from the east, season of migration to the north, an oriental lady in Paris, and the dilemma of a ghost. What do writers of the east want from the west? Are they seeking for revenge? Are they hunting compensation? Are they guaranteeing help, or what? Are they satisfied with a marriage and love relationship with previous colonizing states? Are they getting their rights back by studying abroad, getting academic certificates, and even teach in Western universities? Are they feeling blessed to get recognition from colonizing powers? Will the transformation of some Western individuals to be pro-African, following the Black continent traditions, will be enough? Finally, will we be able to show our points of views in tongues of others?
Thank you for putting our work in a larger context, for speaking to the issues around feminism, our contributions to African studies.
May please, Professor, there is one paragraph I want to read, the final paragraph.
Sorry about that.
She was asked 10 years ago, in your play, The Dilemma of a Ghost, the African woman who married the African man, she rejected everything. Did you give messages by writing this? Ama Ata Aidoo answered, at that time, I was not consciously sending any messages. I wrote this play when I was at 20 years old. I returned from the conference in Lagos to live in the campus to write this play. In retrospect, all I can say that if I were a critic dealing with this play, I would say that both parties are sending messages and getting messages. It was not only the man or the girl, African American girl, who rejected African society. Africans also had already rejected her smoking, drinking. What I am trying to say is that if you want to bring the two forces together without any preparation, there is meant to be a clash. You bring an African American girl without telling her honestly what you see about your own African society, and then you do tell the people what to expect from an African American person. You just threw them together. What would they do but hate one another? I mean, you could do the experiment, and the same could happen with two Ghanaians coming from two different ethnic groups. And this is the truth. I say this is the truth. Questions raised by writers in several decades are still alive, and answers are given the literary works mentioned above, but we still need more answers in literature and criticism for more understanding and more peaceful, homogeneous world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that brilliant conclusion. And the questions you posed, and those questions will be part of the legacy. We'll be doing a similar program for our departed intellectual superstar, Mr. Mugo. I'll be telling you the date shortly. We are very grateful for members of the media who are here with us. We are grateful for the radio stations and TV stations in Kenya and Ghana and Nigeria broadcasting this live. We are grateful to many of you who have joined us. We will give you the opportunity to talk down the road. Kasaun Chakol, who was mentioned a moment ago, is here with us. We will give you Professor Folabo Ajayi is going to talk later on. The former Minister of Culture in Ghana, who is building what is going to become one of the best museums in Africa. Kojo Yanka is here. He's going to talk later on. And many of you will talk. It's my pleasure to invite Aidoo, who will be so pained at this moment because many of you may not know that he was very close to Mr. Mungo. In fact, part of our last email messages were written to Akwasi. So I understand how his emotions will be at this time. He's a philanthropy professional and a creative writer, senior fellow at Humanity United, very famous, and you know him, the executive director, founding executive director of Trust Africa. He's headed health sciences program at the International Development Research Center. He's headed the Ford Foundation's offices in Senegal and Nigeria. And he was the director of the Ford Foundation Special Initiative for Africa. He's been on the boards of several organizations, including Human Rights Watch, International Development Research Center, Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, ADVITS, and he's chaired the boards of Fund for Global Human Rights, Resource Alliance, Africa Grantmakers Affinity Group, and he's also taught at universities in Ghana, Tanzania, and United States in Africa. You may not remember, I used to have one of the largest clusters of PhD students in the world at some point in time. And he was able to help 3 Ghanaian students that I trained to receive their PhDs through a grant that he gave us. We cannot thank you enough, and I welcome your participation in this event. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And Kina, if you are here, just let you know that we are all with you in spirit. I first met Ama Ata, who I always called Mimia Penyin, my elder sister, and she always called me Mimia Kitwa, younger brother. We have the same last name, but we are not biologically related, and I'll come back to that later on. But I first met her in 1966 when I was in secondary school, preparing for my GCE O-level. And her book, The Dilemma of a Ghost, had just come out. And many of us who were studying literature at the time in secondary school literally memorized the book. And so when I met her, it was at Legon, I said to her, Mama Amata, that book you just wrote, she had just completed her first degree, by the way, is so meaningful, speaking to the imperative of cross-cultural bridging and bonding. And she said, oh, I'm glad you read it, but keep your eyes and ears to the ground, many more will come. And what we need to do in Ghana is to cross the political divides, come together, understand each other across ethnic groups, and so on. What I want to say today has to do with what I call the soul, spirit, and sensibility of Ama Ata Aidoo that I encountered. And there are 6 encounters or 6 areas that are called Ama Ata Aidoo's credit. And credit is the acronym I created to capture those 6 areas. The first, which is the C of credit, was her passion for creativity. And she always said to me, listen, at the end of the day, it's all about creativity. Whether it's politics, economics, whatever it is, we need to be creative. So Ama Ata Aidoo's creativity was always expressed in what I call KABVP, a knowledge production, her attitude, her values, her beliefs, and her practices. The R of her credit is her resilience. She was an extremely resilient person. When she was teaching at the University of Cape Coast, at the time I was a teaching assistant there, Ama Ata Aidoo went to Mfantsipim Secondary School, one of the first secondary schools in Ghana, in Cape Coast, to give a talk. On the way back, she had literally a life-threatening accident. Those of you who knew her in the last few years, you know she always walked with a walking stick. She could barely walk. And that was from the Mfantsipim accident. And many of us at the time, including two of his famous students who are now famous writers, Vincent Odampton, Professor Vincent Odampton, Professor Kojo Opukwajeman, we rushed to try and save her. Eventually she said, oh, it's okay. I did not die and I'll keep going. She was an extremely resilient person. The E of her credit is her equity focus. When in 1982, Ama Ata became the Minister of Education, that year, I went back to Ghana from the United States where I was doing my PhD. I went back to Ghana to do my research. And she was then the Minister of Education. So I met her a few times. And she was all about equity as Minister of Education. She pushed very hard for free education for every person, and especially for women. And she also pushed for free meals for all students. Of course, as some of you may know, that didn't work out very well. This was under the first Jerry Rawlings regime. And what she did then was she stepped down. She stepped down and went to Zimbabwe. And that speaks to the fourth part of her credit, the D. Her dedication, especially for African liberation, was simply incredible. When she moved to Zimbabwe, this was when the terrible genocide, and we call it genocide because over 20,000 people were killed, the Guru Goku Rahundi genocide occurred. And at the time, later on, I was teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And Ama Ata was in Zimbabwe, in Harare. And I went to Harare for a conference. We met. And I asked her, Prof, why have you moved to Zimbabwe, given this terrible genocide and all the instability going on. And the response was, if there's one reason we've got to die, it should be for Africa's liberation. And we need to be liberated from colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, and all. But we also need to be liberated from our own selves. And the Gurunkugunde genocide, as you know, was an inter-ethnic genocide in Zimbabwe at the time. Of course, Ama Ata was a very close friend of the first lady at the time, Sally Mugabe. They were fellow students in Ghana back in the day, in the 50s. But when the situation in Zimbabwe got worse in terms of governance, when Mugabe became more and more dictatorial, again, Ama Ata left. The eye of Ama Ata's credit was her inspiration. She was a very inspirational person. And there's an anecdote here that I have not told anybody. When I graduated from university, I was appointed as a teaching assistant. This was around the time she had the accident. And I was asked to go meet the vice chancellor of the university and the registrar of the university. I was a bit scared, but I went. And the message was, "Oh, welcome. We've just been asked to submit 3 names for consideration for Rhodes Scholarship." And as you know, the Rhodes Scholarship is a very prestigious scholarship. And you are one of the 3 that we would like to submit. So we'd like to know if we should go ahead. And of course, I was overjoyed. So I said, yes, please. When I went downstairs, and this is a story I kept reminding her, she had forgotten a bit, but later she remembered. When I went downstairs, as I was going back to the sociology department, I saw Ama Ata Aidoo. And long story short, what she told me was, "What, Akwasi? Rhodes Scholar? Don't you know about Cecil Rhodes, who was an imperialist racist, who literally captured and took over Zimbabwe and Zambia and named them after himself, called them Rhodesia? Did you know that?" Now, my knowledge of history at the time was a bit limited, so it was very instructive for me. And I ran up to the registrar and the vice chancellor, and I said, "Could you please take my name off the list?" Long story short, eventually they made me a Bank of Ghana scholar, but that's a different story. So her education, her inspiration, and the final is a team spirit. She was somebody who never wanted to work alone, to do it alone. And a few stories here, and I'll end on that note. At some point when I was heading the Ford Foundation's work on Africa, we thought about supporting African creative writers, young African creative writers. And I approached Ama Ata and Ayikwe Ama. Ayikwe Ama is still, they still have it, the Perank program going. And the whole idea was to have We even approached Chedu Achebe at the time, was at Bard College in upstate New York, and a few others, Ngugu Wantiogo. And Ama Ata's response to me was, oh, that's a good idea. Definitely, I would do it, but I do not want to do it alone. I want to have a team of us mentoring or mentoring, I would say, these young writers. And long story short again, Ama Ata set up something called Mbasem Foundation. Mbasem in Chi Ghanaian language means the narratives, the stories of women, the issues of women, the tales of women foundation. So we gave the initial grant for it. And so Kina, if you are with us today, I want you to know that Mbasem Foundation is one of the most important legacies of Ama Ata that most people don't even know about. And I would love for us to connect around that idea to keep it thriving. I can go on and on and on, but I will end on this note. That when I got the invitation to do this, I was a bit hesitant for various reasons. And this is the 45th year of my mother's death by motor accident. And I think of her every day. And two, Ama Ata and I were not almost, we were self-adopted siblings. She always called me Minia Akwasi, I called her Minia Penyin. And even when I had to manage a grant or provide funding, I always had to be careful that people will not see us as family members. A little over a year ago, I reached out to her and arranged for a very small grant from Open Society Foundation of $50,000 for her to complete 2 novels that she was writing. And Kina, if you are here with us, Vincent Odampton last week told me that the novels are almost ready for publication posthumously. And I had to tell Open Society Foundation, no, she's not my biological sister. We have the same last name, but we are not biologically related, because there's always that little issue that comes up. I can go on till tomorrow. In Ghana, we say before I speak, I want to say something. So I can go on till tomorrow. I think my 10 minutes are up. And Kina, let's stay in touch about Mbasem Foundation. And Ama Ata, you are gone, but you are still with us. Your soul is gone, your body is gone, but your legacy, your spirit are all with us every day. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I became emotional. I almost wanted to cry. It's the first time I'm listening to the story of this accident. I knew she was always on wheelchair, but I never asked her the story. And I'm sure many people here will be listening to that story for the first time. One important element that you brought up is about the legacy of that foundation. And you and I must be honest with ourselves that sustaining many of these things is very difficult. Mazrui is here, Alami Mazrui is here, and is familiar with the various projects of Mazrui that we try to do. Mazrui Chia in Kenya, Mazrui Chia in Uganda. I was on the board of some of them. But the good news came from Johannesburg, where we have the Mazrui Institute that our university is funding. So maybe one suggestion after this event, we set up a very small team to think about the sustainability of that foundation. It's always difficult from various examples. I have here with me somebody too. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, on that, I should add, I'm so happy to see my younger brother in this on this forum. So Kina and Kojo, Professor Kojo Opoku Aidoo, who is at the University of Ghana, should also connect on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kina is listening to this, by the way. So I'm sure she will appreciate all these brilliant conversations. We have this is one of the best intellectual crowd you can ever pray to have. I've seen people from Ghana, of course, from Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Kenya, South Africa, University of Cape Town, Stellenbosch. These are the people I know. Uganda. I'm sure there are people that I do not know. And some I've not seen them in a really, really long time. Odiambo, thanks for coming. We are very grateful. Olorun Toba from the poet from Akungwa, thank you. The big Iroko Akachi Ezebo, who also did a performance on Ama Ata Aidoo, College Shetima of Makato Foundation. I'm glad you listened to the point about sustaining that center, and I'm sure we are going to call on you. Prempe, we are very grateful that you are here. If I don't mention your name, you have to forgive me. Scholars of Ghana like Sakefo, who just released a book on African women writers. Thank you for coming. We have the distinguished literary critic who is here, who has joined us from England. Our sister, the big writer, Ogoga, the big poet. Thank you for joining us. If I don't mention your name, forgive me, Ogoga. I've not seen you since you left Texas. I'm glad the death of Ama brought you here so I can see that you are alive. I read you in newspapers all the time. Thanks for joining us. We are very grateful. And sure, we are very, very grateful. Pamela Smith, Azodo, we are really, really, really very grateful to you all. We are leaving a lot of time for members of the audience who want to talk. And at this point, I want to turn to members of the audience. You have to do what we do in Zoom. You have to raise your hand, and then I will call you. Professor Mofalabo Ajayi, she had an advance notice. Please, Professor Mofalabo Ajayi with an advance notice to talk. Shegun, please identify her.
Yeah. Greetings, everybody. Morning, good afternoon, good evening. And I want to thank the organizers of this Zoom session for putting this together. It's Ama Ata Aidoo is deserving, and has, with her work and her activism, her publications, and so on, she really deserved this. We mourn her, we love her, but we know that she lives on. My first encounter with Auntie Ama, sometimes I call her that, was between covers. And I say between covers, I mean between the covers of her book, Our Sister Killjoy. I was so amazed that at such a young age, she could put such thoughts together, such profound analysis of what was going on in Africa and the relationship between colonized Africa and the so-called liberated Western Europe. The interesting thing was that at that time, just a few years back, I was on a similar trip with Sisi. I had a scholarship, I think it was across West Africa, to travel to, it was a scholarship for West Africans and so on, and it was to travel to the US. And this was my first time of going to the US. I've been to Europe before. And just the culture shock, just the differences, just mirrored what I had experienced, what compared to what Sisi was experiencing. And for a long time, at that time, I was calling Ama Ata Aidoo Sisi. She was Sisi to me. I never met her, but it was like I was having this conversation with her. But she really aroused, really awakened my interest in what women had to say and the encounter with her former colonizers, wherever they came from, whether Western Europe or Eastern Europe or whatever. This was followed by, I can also say that I caught my feminist criticism on Ama Ata Aidoo's work. Years after reading Sister Killjoy, I had my first appointment at the University of Ife, now known as Obafemi Awolowo University. And soon after, the Department of Dramatic Arts was created. And I had to teach one of the courses. After a while, I deliberated and I said, I need to bring Sisi to my course. And I was going to look at it from this womanist, feminist point of view. And I had no context in which to, because feminist criticism was almost absent, in Nigeria, in many African higher institutions at that time, and critical perspectives. But I was so intrigued by her. But I was teaching drama. How can I bring the novella, Our Sister Killjoy, into dramatic? So I then came across, because I was searching very, very vigorously, I came across The Dilemma of a Ghost and Anowa at the same time. And it was a difficult choice. Which one should I choose for my course, Dramatic Arts Literary Criticism? I chose Dilemma of a Ghost. Again, I chose Dilemma because of an earlier experience that I had had as a student at the University of Ife when I was a student there, when African Americans were sort of returning home, and there was this, I think, scholarship made available to them. So a number of the students from the USA were coming to Nigerian universities, and University of Ife was one of them. And of course, we did not understand each other. Both of us, the African students and the African American student, had been fed with negative stereotypes about each other. So at first we tried to be friends and so, but in no time, the differences just split wide open. And we had this massive clash as a student, well, students then, and we were young, but it stayed with me. Why did they misunderstand us? Why did we not know about them? And the dilemma of a ghost proved to be a way of exploring this. So I taught that course, and to the amusement of my students, it was like, But then that play really tugged at me for a long time. And so one of my first feminist critical papers was on the dilemma of a ghost. And it helped me to formulate my concept, my feminist concept, especially for African women. And that's how I came about the theory of double patriarchy for colonized African women. But then later, when I came to the US and started teaching, I brought in Anowa. And in a sense, I was happy that I did not teach Anowa in my early days when I didn't know what I was really doing with feminist criticism. And I could not have appreciated what Anowa entailed at that time in the 70s, as I did much later after, and what struck me about Anowa was how Auntie Ama brought in this folktale that, that was used in many West African cultures, at least, to sort of silent women. You are not adventurous. You have to obey. You have to be obedient. Whereas when you compare similar folktale with the one that featuring a male hero, I mean, he's a hero, he's on adventure. But Ama Ata Aidoo used this folktale to explore the idea of colonization, decolonization, and the idea of national struggle for independence and nation building, just using the idea of a woman in the folktale being the hero, rather than being rejected and being subjected to punishment. She really questioned the issues, biting issues, again, between Africans and African Americans, that has been seldom explored by our male writers. And she used it. Then when I read her critical reviews and so on, that she herself had written about her experiences as a woman, she said, this is a woman after my heart. I never met her. We've sort of been crossing each other at conferences. And then finally, for her 70th, there was a collection of essays on her 70th birthday to mark her 70th. And I submitted one article, which was at the prompting of the person who edited the book, Anne Adams. And she reminded me of something I had mentioned in passing about how at the University of Ife, OAU, her play, Anowa, there's a long story behind that, which I had written in that paper that I submitted, about how we wanted to produce Anowa at the university in the Department of Dramatic Arts, but because it was supposed to be a joyous convocation event and celebrating our students and blah, 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 the story of Anowa was changed. I had mentioned it in passing to Anne Adams, and she reminded me, you can write about that. And say, oh. So I wrote on disobedient subversions, which is in this collection. I don't know if you can see it. I should have put it, but anyway, so it's Ama Ata Aidoo at 70. And so I recounted how the play was changed. A play that was searching, that was questioning the ideas, contributions of Africans in the European transatlantic slave trade, and really asking us to examine ourselves, our parts, Africans' parts, roles in this nefarious trade, human trade. It became something joyous, celebration, and the significance, the message that Ama Ata Aidoo was trying to convey was just vaporized like that. So I wrote about it. And when at the launching, and Ama Ata Aidoo was present, she had read the article and she said, "Oh, so this was happening. You people turned my play upside down." We made a joke of it, but I could see that, I was not happy. She was not happy. In fact, the production of that play, the play that was supposed to be an Anowa, really caused a furor in Nigeria and among academics, literary academics in Nigeria at that time. And for a time we corresponded. And the last thing I want to mention, I hope I'm not taking too much time, was the Chinese Republic of whatever. They wanted to introduce African plays to their students, their audience in the country. So and they approached the editor of African Theatre, Martin Barnum, another Englishman, but expert on African plays and writings in general. So Martin Barnum, who was also my professor, then approached me. "Would you like to write something about?" I jumped at it, about Ama Ata Aidoo. And so I picked on Anowa, and to write about it. I did a lot of research. I found out so many things that I did not know about Ama Ata Aidoo that I had neglected. So because I had to write on the playwright and also on the play itself, the Anowa, which I had chosen. I wrote it. I was so happy with myself. But unfortunately, something went wrong along the line. I don't know the thing between the Chinese and the editor of African Theatre. Antiama did not give permission for us to publish Anowa in that collection, because you publish the play and you write about the playwright and your critical analysis of it. It really, I wrote her, we talked on the phone, Antiama, but something deeper than what I could understand had gone on. And so her play was not included in that collection. But for what she has done, for the legacy she left behind, for her activism on behalf of women, on behalf of nation, on behalf of the African continent, and the true meaning of liberation. Because when you talk of liberation, you're talking of people, not just men, not just women. You cannot be liberated if 50% of you is kept in captivity. And that's the essence of Antiama. Her pursuit of African women's liberation is to seek the liberation of a whole people, a whole continent. And for this, her work lives on. She lives on. Antiama, you are always with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, distinguished professor, poet, dramatist, prose writer, Professor Ajayi. Thank you very, very much. When I was at Smith College with Amma, I raised the question, why didn't you have a literary agent? And I began to search for her. It didn't work out. Promise, who served on the Shoyinka jury with me, a very distinguished writer, H.E, many of them. They laid the foundation for what current writers are now benefiting from, most especially the prominent writer, and all these fiction writers. At some point, we may have to talk about the foundation, the pioneers who provided the pathways for others to follow. James Gibbs, thanks for coming. And Adams, your collection has been mentioned, thank you. Caroline Boyce Davis, thank you. It was Professor Ade Ajayi who told me a proverb. It is when you die at your funeral that we know the geography of your influence. Because your relations, like the daughter who is here, may not even be aware of the extensive nature and geography of her mom. She's going to later come on board to give the vote of thanks. I'm very grateful for the BBC. They're here. Stations in Malawi have joined us. They just contacted us. Tanzania, they joined us. And Botswana, they are streaming this program live in their various countries. I want to go back to Ghana. It's deliberate to call on the famous award-winning writer, Bisi Adjapon. I'm sure she'll be wondering, how come I've not called her? I'm doing it deliberately. She is very well acclaimed for her novels, Daughter in Exile by HarperCollins, 2023. Part of the generation that I mentioned who have inherited the legacy of the pioneers. And she also wrote for HarperCollins in 2021, The Teller of Secrets. And she won the best book by the American Library Association, named the best book, Washington Post, Boston Globe, Globe and Mail in Canada, Pop Sugar, Essence, and Miss Magazine. Her short story of Women and Frogs was nominated for the Kim Prize. And she came up with a second novel, Daughter in Exile, which won the best book by the New Yorker magazine and Amazon Editors Best Book Award. Our reviews have been widely published. American Library Association's book list, Library Journal, Book Browse, World Literature Today. And it was listed a must read by the Root and Essence. She's very famous, having contributed to the Guardian, Sun Magazine, Al Jazeera, New York Times, Washington Times, Brito paper, and she has served as the International Affairs Specialist for the US Foreign Agri Service. And she won the Civil Rights Award for Human Relations. As an educator, Bisi has won an Excellence in Teaching Award in Virginia. And for 4 years, she served as the Artistic Director of the Young Shakespeare Company in Washington. Now, she's a full-time writer living in Ghana and the United States. Bisi, you can now understand why I decided to call you now. Please make your presentation.
So I'm writing from the point of view of somebody who attended the same high school as Auntie Ama decades after she had already left Wesley Girls High School. From what I understand, she was not supposed to attend that school. However, some forces conspired together to place her at Wesley Girls. How lucky for me. Decades after she graduated and blazed a literary path, I entered the same school. It was there that I learned about her. Some say she inspired a tradition. Others say the tradition existed and that she enhanced it. But whatever the case, once a year, over the course of a couple of weeks or so, each class from the third year upwards would produce a play, and the staff would choose a winner. The winners would then go on to represent the school at inter-colleges and on to regionals, etc. And so I was 13 when a senior class performed The Dilemma of a Ghost. I wanted to jump out of my seat. In elementary school, drama had transformed me from someone who wanted to be invisible to someone who was quite comfortable in her skin. However, I had no desire to act or take part in any plays. The Dilemma of a Ghost changed that. I can still hear the brilliant dialogue, the haunting song of the ghost's quandary, and I can feel the complex characters. I was electrified. I felt deep sympathy for the foreign wife caught between two cultures who wanted nothing of snails crawling around her. I also felt the pain of the Ghanaian mother who no longer understood her Bintu son. I'm not quite sure, but I have to believe that was the winning performance that year. The following year, another class, or perhaps it was the same class, performed Anoa. That was even more captivating, a play about a woman who rejected prescribed roles for women, a woman determined to live life on her own terms. The shocking ending stayed with me for a very long time. It was from that moment that theater became my passion. So it wasn't novel writing initially, theater. When our class got to the age where we could produce a play, I got the notion to write an original play for us. The young people are blissfully fearless. I figured if Ama Ata Aidoo, a woman who attended Wesley Girls, had written a play at a young age, then surely I could write one and even direct it. My principal, bless her, said to go ahead. I wrote it by hand, and the school secretary had to type it out so we could have copies. That was the winning play that year. I wrote because Auntie Ama did. Years later in America, I would direct school plays and eventually become the artistic director of a theater company for the young. That seed Auntie Ama planted in me through her words bore fruit. It manifested in the boy with a terrible stutter who had been bullied, who discovered that on stage, his stutter, I should say, disappeared, replaced by self-confidence. Today, he is a professional actor residing in Virginia. Auntie Ama's seed blossomed in this mildly autistic student, another bullied girl who discovered her voice and strength on stage. Another woman is now a resident theater director of her own company. Oh, Auntie Ama, what joy you gave to others, what passion you inspired because you wrote. I kept wanting to meet her and tell her how her plays had impacted me, but the opportunity wouldn't come for many years. While in Virginia, I discovered her novels in the international section of Barnes and Nobles. I snatched them right away. I lost myself in changes. And as an African immigrant in America, our sister Killjoy particularly resonated with me. Cece's interrogations and unapologetic Africanness resonated with me. They mirrored and helped crystallize my own feelings and empowered me. More than ever, I wanted to meet Auntie Ama. In 2018, Of Women and Frogs, which began as a short story, my debut novel found a home in Farafina, an imprint of Kachifo publishers in Nigeria. My editor informed me that I would be attending Peja Literary Festival in Accra, and that I would be doing my first public reading, and the book would be launched by someone called Kina Likimani. I had no idea who Kina was, so I Googled her. I could hardly hold still. The daughter of the woman I had longed to meet was launching my book. When I met Kina, I quickly determined she was not a reproduction of her mother, but a woman in her own right. It is a testimony to Auntie Ama's parenting that she raised a daughter to own her own identity and carve a path for herself, which is, among other things, reading, reviewing, and championing women. We attended festivals together and socialized. Often I expressed my wish to meet Auntie Ama, knowing she was not physically as active as she used to be. In 2020, when I was asked to contribute to an anthology commemorating Auntie Ama's 80th birthday, I didn't hesitate. The launch was to be at the Getty Institute. I could hardly wait. I was finally going to meet the woman I had idolized all my life. Then COVID struck, and I thought, really, God, how could you? Of course, the event was canceled. As disappointed as I was, because of her advanced age and health challenges, I understood the importance of keeping her safe. Fortunately, that year, New York University Accra campus hosted an event in her honor. At last, I got my wish. I was enthralled by her. As a half Yoruba raised in Ghana, I tend to push against the practice of kneeling when greeting. The whole idea of genuflecting before another human, however senior, irked me. But when I approached her on stage, as if it was the most natural thing, I dropped to my knee. I was that honored. She was warm, funny, and pleased that I was an old girl of Wesley Girls High School. In the limited time we had, I told her about her work's impact on my life and on others. She encouraged me to keep writing, and she said to come by the house for a visit, but the timing was always problematic. In 2021, HarperCollins bought rights of Women and Frauds and published it as The Teller of Secrets. While I was deeply grateful for the many blurbs from renowned writers, it did not feel right to not have one from Auntie Ama, the woman who was Ghana's premier feminist writer, a woman I so admired. I knew that with her generosity of spirit and zest for life, if she could, she would write a blurb for me. Indeed, she did not disappoint. Although overwhelmed, through Kina, she provided her support. That blurb meant everything to me. And for lack of time, I'm not going to read it. But the reason I wanted her blurb was because I wanted the younger generation to look at my book and to inquire about her and to read her books. I wanted them to never forget her. The last time I saw her, she could only appear on screen for our panel on her works organized by the Kane Prize. Even then, she was vibrant and feisty. Despite recurring difficulties, I expected her to live for another decade at least. Well, she's resting now. Thank you, Auntie Ama. Your torch flamed mine, and mine has ignited others who will light more people up at such a multiplier effect that it would be hard to quantify. Your spirit and your words, as everybody has said, will live on forever. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. That's warm. And I'm glad you greeted her as a Yoruba woman. I'm very glad. That was very appropriate. Thank you very much, Bisi. Thank you very much. Dr. Ogaga, the great poet and prose writer, Your turn, please. At this time, I'll be limiting people's time so that many people can talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Speaking from Warri in the Niger Delta, Nigeria. Mine will be very, very brief. I trained as a lawyer but found the possibility of becoming a poet while I was a secondary school student, Federal Government College, Warri. In Form 3, while I was, well, that would be about 9th grade, we read The Dilemma of a Ghost. Then years later, after I had graduated, I'd gone to law school, I'd worked with the Civil Liberties Organization in Nigeria for 10 years, but really, really wanted to come full-time to where my head really was, which was literature. Professor Shoyinka advised me to go to the US and do an MFA, because by then I had published my first collection. I was finishing a manuscript for a second collection of poems. And then I wound up at Cornell doing an MFA. But I still felt somewhat like a fish out of water. Lawyer, human rights activist, now in academia. Now, I've been searching for a way to find my way in academia. Without planning it, Ama Ata Aidoo became a distant mentor, teacher. I took a graduate course called the Pan-African Sampler. I think it was taught by Professor Hortense Spillers. And one of the books we had already was Black Boy by a native boy, Black Boy by Richard Wright. And I had to do a term paper. Again, I was casting about, what am I going to do? And Ama Ata Aidoo came to my rescue. I wrote a paper called The Dilemma of a Ghost as a main title, Ambivalence, Politics, and Race in Richard Wright's Black Power. Essentially, what I was doing there was to liken Richard Wright's dilemma. It was really a dilemma, actually. I was being nice, as you might agree, but this difficult relationship to Africa with this book, which was his travelogue on his visit to Africa, to the continent, representing some of what I thought was the worst about this brilliant writer whom I'd admired and was now encountering in Black Power. It's a kind of disappointment. But with Ama Ata Aidoo, I could navigate that emotional, difficulty more successfully. And also, I should say, with the help of a contrast with Maya Angelou's own account of her return to the continent in All God's Children Need Walking Shoes. So what is the dilemma that so happily came to my rescue? As we all know, the ghost of the play is debating at the junction of Elmina, where to go. And of course, Ato is married, or was married, to an African-American woman. So the irony though was that I was likening Richard Wright to Ato, the protagonist, who could not quite come to grips with the complexity of the moment of change from an old to a new world. Whereas even his own relatives back in Ghana had come to understand his African-American wife better. But the Ato, who's westernized, who was studied in America, come back with an African-American wife, could not. And it just showed me that as radical, as even going by the not only Black Power, but even the earlier book, Black Boy, as radical his ideology was, thinking about Africa was, it was still too thoroughly westernized, as Richard Wright, to ever be Africa, or at least to ever speak as somebody who had, how shall I put it, a more becoming race awareness. So I'm saying this only because I found myself at the time in the United States where I had no previous grounding in a formal study of literature, but was really crashing my way into it as a poet or somebody aspiring to be a poet. At that time, I didn't really still consider myself as a poet. But who was there to be my teacher, to guide me in that process of transition, similar in some way to the kind of transition that Richard Wright could not so successfully negotiate or add to in The Dilemma of a Ghost? It was Ama Ata Aidoo. And I thought, if today we are celebrating her, I should mention this, because I met her a few times, but I never had a personal, close relationship with her. But at events, I think one of them was one of the events organized at Brad College to celebrate Chinua Achebe, that one, and then one other time I think at Cornell. But apart from those two or maybe one more instances, I never really met her. But so she never got to know how much she meant, to me in my own evolution. So I just thought I would use this moment, to acknowledge it, to say it, and to also join in what everybody else has said, which is that her spirit lives on, her work, the writer never dies, as we know. So she lives on, and I'm grateful for that. And I thank you, Professor Falola, for organizing this event so we could at least all jointly find a moment to celebrate her. And I hope that more of this will go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will be organizing something similar for Mr. Remugo. The notice will be released shortly. Last November, I was in Ghana as a guest of the University of Communication, and I was passing through one of their floors, and I saw the Ama Ata Aidoo Center. It's my pleasure to invite the founder of the university, if he's still here, His Excellency, former Minister of Culture, Kojo Yanka, to speak to the activities of that center. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Professor Falola. I will take only 5 minutes because I have another meeting. Yeah, thank you for putting this together. I think this is one of the greatest moments in the lives of people in the literary community. It is something that we wish we could do regularly, and particularly because we lose a sense of who our writers are, not too long after they are dead. So I'm happy that you are putting this together, but it is in the same vein. I must say that we at the African University College of Communications decided on the 75th anniversary, the birthday anniversary of Ama Ata Aidoo, to establish a center for creative writing and named after her. Yeah, it's okay to say we have very famous writers across the length and breadth of the world, but we don't keep their memory. And it's a shame that universities don't do that regularly. Yeah, we did it in 2017 when she was 75. And I must say it has been one of the most impactful centers at the university. Since it was established, over 4,000 students have participated in activities at the Ama Ata Aidoo Center. And the director of the center, who is a very dynamic young man, has produced 4 anthologies put put together by those who attend the Ama Ata Aidoo lectures. Originally, we wanted this to be conversations with Ama Ata Aidoo. Of course, we did. On 2 or 3 occasions, she herself appeared. But then later, when we found that she couldn't appear personally, we decided that we should have other authors coming to meet the young students. The whole idea was to grow young writers. So we have passed through over 4,000 students who have benefited from the Ama Ata Aidoo's writings, all 13 major books, and all the various authors who have come to also expose their own works to students. As I'm speaking, the 5th anthology is getting ready and it will be published. I'm saying this because we are not using the Ama Ata Aidoo Center for only her books. We are also exposing the books of other writers through the center. And I think this is one of the greatest legacies that we can leave for Ama Ata Aidoo. She was a fighter, a feminist. I knew her from Cape Coast when she was teaching at Cape Coast University. I served in government with her. She was Minister for Education. I was in information, not culture. But we met again several times. And when I was doing my graduate studies in African studies, and I was studying feminism, I studied her closely together with Bisi Adjapon and Maria Maba and a few of those women writers. So I think it's important that we keep the memories of all these, but it will be even more important for us to find a place where students can go to, not only to buy their books, but to study about them. It's part of the reason, Professor Falela, that we are working on the Pan-African Heritage World Museum in Ghana, where we will have a literary section to expose to visitors all the writers, most of them from Africa and the diaspora, so people will know not only those in their country, but from other countries. The dilemma of a ghost still exists. We have not bridged the gap, and that is part of also the mission of the Pan-African Heritage Museum, to bridge the gap between those on the continent and those in the diaspora, so that we will not be asking questions about whether to go right or to go left, as in the dilemma of a ghost. But I believe that we have a lot to offer each other, and I'm happy that you brought this up. Today's meeting has been very useful for me and productive, and we will take it from there. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And one of the things we can do is to bring together all these various initiatives. Maybe one board can coordinate them. I would give advice to Kina as many of these things progress, because it's an area in which I have some experience. And thank you very much. If you want to talk, do please raise your hand so I can call you. I'm grateful to Professor Ebon Clark, distinguished playwright who has joined us. Ayesha Imam, I think the last time I saw you was in England, so many years ago. Thanks for coming. Our elder Obiana Namika, thank you so much and congratulations on your honorary doctorate from a university in South Africa. And you receive another one in France. I've not seen you to formally congratulate you. Thanks for joining us. If I don't mention your name, please, you have to forgive me. Please forgive me. I'm just mentioning the names of my friends only. All of you are my friends. Chido Onuma, thank you so much. If anyone wants to talk before I begin to close the program. Asuna Aidoo, if you're here, you want to say something? Congratulations on your distinguished professorship, which was announced last week. All of you, you uplift the continent. These are not individual achievements. We are very grateful to you. If we do not have any speaker, Oswaldo, is your system all right before I call on Excellency to close the session? Our poet, is your system all right now, Oswaldo?
Oswald.
Is your system working?
Sorry, Prof. I think he's not here.
It's not, his system is not, is your system working?
Okay, he's back.
If your system is not working, if you send me a live recording, I will share it.
We need to unmute him. Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Shall I go to Cape Coast? Oh, to Amina. Shall I go to Cape Coast? Oh, to Amina. I don't know. Oh, yes, I can. I don't know. And yes, I can. Auntie Ama, are the center of the world. It has been a season to a centenaric season since Auntie Ifwa bowed out on the stage of life. A decade since Kofi Debu Awuno down in Westgate traversed the last veil of the night, and half a decade since Atukwe, the Logoligi logarithm, metamorphosed into being a poetry god. And now that the lens of the world focuses on us, near Nai Osumpu, here you, goddess twin of Saturday, descend down the hill, down into the sacred groove to becoming an ancestress. Owame wakabemwo, Noame wakabemwo, Owam kaziaba wakabemwa, Owam wakaziaba wakabemwa, Ndi owame wakabemwo. Oh, we are paid. There is a tent of mourners raised in our home. The scribe warrior went deep into the forest to pluck leaf. When she went, night came. Alas, our house full of cheers. Owam kaziaba wakabemwa, Nti owame wakabemu. Yet when the night came, it came with death. But when death came, Auntie Ama, your voice in the words of your stanzas, your plots and paragraphs never drew you further, drew you closer. Alas, we say, when the night came, It came with death. And where death came, life came. Wame waka bemu. Rest in peace, Auntie Ama. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's worth waiting for. Thank you. Thank you. Very moving. A speaker from Zimbabwe, if you're still with us, wanted to say something very quickly. If you have left, Kulube from Zimbabwe, please. Go ahead, Kulube.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take this short time to say thank you so much for this platform. I feel almost robbed in that I only got to know of Mahama's work in 2021. So I feel like I'm trying to catch up. So her passing while she had a life which was long felt short for me because I didn't know enough of it. So this was a very wonderful platform which has helped. I think we're feeling shortchanged because what we are finding is that in Africa, we aren't really exposed to work from other parts of Africa. So if I'm in the South, I've got a lot of work in the South, right? Only if I have the opportunity to travel or to meet someone that comes from that country, then I learn more. So I feel I am catching up, and I speak for many more women, and also that those that love literature. So I just want to thank you all for this platform. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to learning more as I go. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And together with our colleagues, University of Kenyatta, they're here today. I saw Professor Peter Wekesa. We are restoring the initiative of continental collaboration, which we used to have. And when we were looking for a representative from the Francophone French-speaking, I don't like all these divisions, by the way. We were surprised that many people are not aware of Aidoo's work. And part of what the foundation will do is to engage in translation and make this work available in places, as she mentioned, as in Zimbabwe and others, where we need to broadcast our work. I will call once again on Ambassador Busia to give us a poem before I call on Imeta's daughter to give a vote of thanks. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you very much. And I thank the team for honoring me by letting me close out. And the reason is, of course, I'm closing out with my offering to the collection that was mentioned earlier, the 70th birthday anniversary collection edited by Anne Adams. My contribution to that volume, though, was a found poem, a poem made up of the titles and concepts of Auntie Ama Ata Aidoo's works. So those of almost everybody here then will recognize what I have done. The poem is called For the Eagle Who Taught the Chickens the Meaning of Flight. And of course, this is also a tribute from those of us who were taught to fly. And I'm so glad, Bisi, that you mentioned the importance of having a blurb It's like the generations, what we said, what she gave for us through the generations. Anyway, for the eagle who taught the chickens the meaning of flight. No black-eyed squint of a sister killjoy, you gave us someone talking to some time to banish the dilemma of a ghost and call for changes to come. Sankofa, every bird must claim its own song. You gave us someone talking to some time when there was no sweetness here to be a woman, to be an African woman. Every darkness has its light. To banish the dilemma of a ghost, your mouth that eats salt and pepper came to pronounce an angry letter in January. Every wrong can be made right. You call for changes to come. Truly, you gave us love stories, African love stories, to bless wherever the girl who can. Every eagle holds the power of flight.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to call on Kina Aidoo, please, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much to Ambassador Bisi Auntie Abena. It's moving for you, for the poem that you read, using the titles of her works. You know, since Mami passed, a lot of Ghanaians, they've been describing her as prolific. And she would have laughed and said, me, no, because it was a thing between the two of us. She used to say she had titles of poems and short stories and novels that she hadn't written yet. She certainly wouldn't describe herself as prolific, but it was a thing. She would say, oh, I've come up with the title of a short story. And I would say, well, have you written it? And she would say, do I have the time? So thank you. So that when you were doing the poem, that's what that's what reminded me of that. So thank you. You know, she also used to say, she used to get like violently upset if a writer gave a work, whether it's a poem, a short story, a play, a novel, a bad title. She used to say, what's the point in having labored and giving it such a horrible title? So again, sometimes the titles were even better than the book. Sometimes we came across and we discussed. So thank you so much, Auntie Abena, for that. I want to thank Professor Falola for today and everybody who has joined. You know, it took me, I was watching on my assistant's phone, and I really, I'm going to confess that Professor Falola called me to actually show my face, because it's been a very difficult time, especially since Auntie Michelle died on Friday. Mumbi and I, Auntie Michelle's daughter, we talk about how these two have connived to have gone within a month of each other. But of course, the person who really connived is my mother, who would not have been, I mean, Auntie Michelle and my mother loved each other dearly, but vastly different people and vastly different approaches to their health. My mother was stubborn. Auntie Michelle has fought this cancer for over 30 years. And I really don't think that my mother would have survived this weekend that her sister has left. So in some ways, when Mumbi, when you know, Auntie Michelle was declining and Mumbi and I were struggling with what was happening, we tell ourselves that later on, there is a beauty in what has passed, in what has happened this month, that they went so close to each other, and maybe that's how in the end they wanted it. So again, I had to make those comments. On my own behalf, I'm an only child. And even if there were 10 of us, I don't think that the legacy of a writer like my mom is something that children can handle on their own. As it is, it's only me. So I know that it's just not going to even be possible for me to say I'm going to be the gatekeeper or the keeper of my mother's legacy. It's if she's read 100 years from now, if she's appreciated, it's really going to be through the works of people like you, through initiatives like what Uncle Tonian has done. Because it's just not possible. I couldn't possibly. So again, I want to thank everybody. There are people here, Uncle Akwasi, Professor Yanka, a lot of you here, Carol Boyce Davis, people who have been with my mother for a very, very long time. On her own behalf, I want to tell you that she loved you all so deeply, as you know. I don't think that my a niece of mine writing a tribute to my mother said, to know you is to know love. I don't think that, I think Mommy, and I'm not saying this because she's my mother, I think she showed her love for her people, for her clan, which is you guys, for the continent, for women, in everything that she did. So again, it's not going to be possible for, I just can't even imagine. And if, by the way, I am slow to seek help, it's also because she was like that and I'm worse than she is. So the thing about this period that I find myself in, some days I wake up and I think, wow, I can't organize the funeral of a global literary icon, and other days I think I can. It's been the most uncomfortable, besides the grief, the most uncomfortable thing for me has been asking for help. So it's not if you don't hear from me, it's not because I don't want people to come on board. You're going to have to create your own platform. So because none of this is easy. Again, so thank you so much. The funeral is the 13th. They're giving her a state funeral on the 13th of July. Then we are taking, the 13th is a Thursday. Then on Friday, we are taking her to the village. And over the weekend, we are giving her a full traditional village funeral. Because above all things, she was a village girl. So we are returning her to her village. She'll be buried next to her mother's. And so she's going home. So I want to thank you, everybody, for this, for the appreciation. I think, Mommy was humble to a fault. Since she passed, I have been bowled over by the global outpouring, from African intellectuals, readers. I keep wanting to show her what's happening. She would have been completely in awe and unbelieving of all the things that people have said. So I thank everybody for recognizing her life's work, because Mommy's writing and her purpose and her need to write cost her, she was in a car accident because of it. The reason she limped and then used a walker and then was in a wheelchair was because she'd gone one early. In fact, she'd been given a room when I was about 7 years old by the headmaster of Infantipim school to go and write. She always used to want to write away from family. And she'd gone and spent a Saturday night there. And on the Sunday early morning when she was returning, Infantipim is a Methodist boys' school, the counterpart to Westie Girls. It sits on a hill. And when she was coming down that hill, her brakes failed. And in order to avoid hitting people, she swerved and hit a wall. And her leg was broken in 3 places. And she was in a cast for 10 months. So when people just have to be fearless with their art, because literally Mommy's need and and it's a need to write, showed on her body. I mean, she put her body on the line for this. So I just want to tell creatives, sometimes young people lose their nerve. You mustn't lose your nerve. So thank you so much, Uncle Tony, for this. I am quite sure we'll meet again, all of us, or some of us in different forms. For those of you who are coming to Ghana, I look forward to hosting you. Thank you for this, and may her legacy, may people even find new ways of interpreting her work, and may her legacy live on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll give you the last voice. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. And we'll announce the program for Ms. Ray, who is also a good friend of mine. I actually met her through Ama and also the connection with Ngugi Wationgo. All the great writers who are here today, we are blessed by your presence. Greetings from the African Union. Greetings from the ECOWAS. They sent a note why this program is ongoing. Well, you are shy of asking for help. We will teach you how to do that. It's our responsibility to make